She could hear the music swelling through the walls. In 12 minutes, her mother would walk down that aisle. In 12 minutes, everything would change. But Sarah Mitchell wasn't thinking about the flowers or the guests or the carefully rehearsed vows. She was thinking about the folder in her hands. The one her mother had never seen. The one that would destroy everything. Her hands trembled as she reached for the door handle. Behind it, 200 people waited. Her mother waited. And the man who'd been lying to them for 18 months stood at the altar, smiling like he'd already won. But some secrets don't stay buried. And some daughters refuse to stay silent. This is the story of the wedding that never happened, and the truth that changed everything. Before we continue deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. US, UK, Canada, Australia, Germany amongst others. Please write in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Linda Mitchell had stopped believing in second chances. At 47 years old, after a divorce that left her raising Sarah alone for 12 years, she'd convinced herself that romantic love was something other people got to have. Something she'd missed her window for. She worked double shifts at the hospital, came home exhausted, made dinner, helped with homework, and fell asleep wondering if this was all there was. Then she met David Richardson at a charity gala in spring of 2022. He wasn't flashy. He didn't have smooth pickup lines or expensive cologne. He was quiet, thoughtful, with kind eyes that seemed to actually see her. Not the tired nurse in scrubs. Not the single mom juggling bills. But her. The woman she'd almost forgotten existed underneath all the responsibility. He asked about her dreams. When was the last time someone had done that? They started slowly. Coffee dates that turned into dinner. Walks in the park where he listened, really listened, when she talked about Sarah, about her fears, about the life she'd built from scratch after everything fell apart. He never rushed her. Never pushed. He seemed content just being near her, and that patience felt like the most romantic thing anyone had ever offered. By summer, he'd met Sarah, brought her favorite books without being asked. Remembered she was allergic to strawberries. Fixed the leaky faucet Linda had been meaning to call a plumber about for 6 months. He fit into their lives like a puzzle piece they hadn't known was missing. And when he proposed on New Year's Eve, with snow falling outside and Sarah's blessing already secured, Linda cried tears she didn't know she'd been holding back for years. Sarah was 16 when her mother started dating David. Old enough to be protective but young enough to want her mom to be happy. And at first, David seemed perfect. Too perfect, maybe, but Sarah pushed that thought away. Her mother deserved perfect after everything she'd been through. She remembered the nights after the divorce when she'd hear her mom crying in the bathroom, trying to muffle the sound so Sarah wouldn't worry. She remembered the birthday when there was no cake because money was too tight that month, and her mom had smiled through tears and said they'd celebrate next year instead. David represented a new beginning, a chance for her mother to finally exhale. So Sarah smiled when he joined them for dinner. She laughed at his jokes. She accepted his presence in their small, carefully rebuilt world. But there were moments. Small ones. The kind you could easily dismiss if you wanted to. Like the time David's phone rang during dinner and he practically sprinted to the other room to answer it, his voice low and urgent before he came back smiling, claiming it was just work. Or the weekend he said he was visiting his sister in Boston, but Sarah could have sworn she saw his car parked outside a hotel downtown. She mentioned it to her mom once. Just casually. Just wondering. And the look of hurt that crossed Linda's face made Sarah immediately backtrack, apologize, promise she must have been mistaken. She learned then that questioning David meant questioning her mother's happiness. And she couldn't bear to be the one who took that away. The real unraveling began 6 weeks before the wedding. Sarah wasn't snooping, not really. She was looking for the guest list her mother had asked her to print. David's laptop was open on the kitchen table, password already entered, screen glowing in the afternoon light. She moved the mouse to wake it up and that's when she saw it. An email thread. The subject line simply read, payment schedule, but it was the content that made her freeze. David was corresponding with someone named Marcus about money owed. Significant money. The tone was urgent, almost desperate. References to previous debts, to other women, to a pattern Sarah couldn't quite piece together but knew instinctively was wrong. She should have closed the laptop. Should have walked away. But something deep in her gut, That same instinct that had whispered warnings she'd ignored for months, made her keep reading. She found more emails. Dozens of them. Messages to women with subject lines like, "Can't wait to see you," and "Missing you already." Photos she'd never seen. References to places David claimed he'd never been. And then she found the document. A PDF file buried in a folder marked "Personal." It was a court record from 3 years ago. David Richardson, real name David Sanderson, convicted of financial fraud. Multiple counts. He'd targeted women through online dating sites, gained their trust, gained access to their finances, and disappeared. He'd served 18 months and been released on probation with a requirement to stay away from relationship-based financial schemes. The man her mother was going to marry in 6 weeks was a convicted con artist. And they were his latest marks. Sarah printed everything. Every email. Every photo. Every court document. She created a folder 2 inches thick with evidence of David's real identity, his real past, his real intentions. And then she sat on her bedroom floor at 3 in the morning, surrounded by papers that proved the man her mother loved didn't exist, and she cried. Not because she'd been right to be suspicious, but because she knew what this information would do. It would destroy her mother. It would confirm Linda's deepest fear, that she wasn't worthy of love, that happiness wasn't meant for her, that the universe would always snatch away anything good before she could fully hold onto it. Sarah could stay silent. She could let the wedding happen. Maybe David had changed. Maybe this time was different. Maybe her mother would never find out and they could all just live in the comfortable lie he'd constructed. People did that, didn't they? Chose the beautiful fiction over the ugly truth? For 3 days, Sarah carried the folder in her backpack, unable to decide. She watched her mother try on her dress again, adjusting the shoulders, smiling at her reflection with a joy Sarah hadn't seen in years. She listened to David talk about their honeymoon plans, his hand on Linda's shoulder, his voice warm and convincing, and she wondered if exposing him made her brave or cruel. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday evening. Sarah couldn't hold it anymore. She waited until Linda was alone in the kitchen, preparing dinner, humming softly to herself. "David, it's not his real name," Sarah said quietly. Her mother turned, confused. "What are you talking about?" Sarah placed the folder on the counter between them. "His name is David Sanderson. He's a convicted felon. He's done this before. To other women. He's doing it to us." The color drained from Linda's face. She reached for the counter to steady herself. This can't be, you must have made a mistake." Sarah opened the folder, showed her the court documents, the emails, the photos. The evidence of a man who'd built his entire relationship on lies. Linda read in silence. Minutes passed. When she finally looked up, her eyes were hollow. "Where did you get this?" "I found it on his laptop. I wasn't trying to, and then I couldn't stop looking." Her mother's voice was barely a whisper. "How long have you known?" "3 days. Why didn't you tell me immediately?" Sarah's voice broke. "Because I knew what it would do to you. Because I wanted you to be happy. Because I'm sorry, Mom, I'm so sorry." Linda sank into a chair, still holding the papers, staring at proof that her second chance had been another mistake. "How could I not see it? How could I be so stupid?" "You're not stupid. He's just good at this. He's done it before. He knows exactly what to say." But that made it worse somehow, didn't it? Knowing she was just another mark. Just another target in a pattern that predated her and would continue after her if she didn't stop it. Linda wanted to confront David immediately. Sarah begged her to wait, to think, to plan. "If he knows we know, he'll disappear. We need to be smart about this." But Linda was past being smart. She was hurt and humiliated and furious. When David came home that night, cheerful and unsuspecting, she met him at the door with the folder. "Who are you?" she asked, voice shaking. He looked at the papers in her hands and his entire demeanor changed. "Where did you get that?" "Sarah found it." "Is it true? Are you David Sanderson? Have you been lying to us this entire time?" He tried deflecting first. Said the court records were a mistake, a misunderstanding. He'd been falsely accused, wrongfully convicted. He'd been meaning to tell her but the timing never seemed right. But Linda had read every page. She knew the details. The testimonies from other women. The pattern of behavior. The calculated manipulation. "You targeted me," she said. "This was never real." David's mask slipped further. He tried apologizing. Then justifying. Then, finally, threatening. "If you try to report me, I'll make things difficult for you. I know where you work. I know Sarah's schedule. I know everything about you. That's when Sarah stepped forward, phone in hand. I've already sent copies of everything to 3 different email addresses. If anything happens to us, it goes to the police automatically. You need to leave. Now. David looked between them. Mother and daughter, united against him. He'd underestimated them. Thought Linda was too desperate for love and Sarah too young to be a real threat. He'd been wrong on both counts. He left that night, packed a bag while they watched and walked out without another word. The wedding was 3 weeks away. Sarah thought her mother would cancel everything immediately. Call the venue, inform the guests, acknowledge publicly that the wedding was off. But Linda didn't. She sat in silence for hours after David left, staring at her engagement ring, and then she said something that surprised Sarah. I want to do it at the wedding. I want everyone there. I want them to see. Sarah didn't understand at first. Mom, there's no wedding. There's no groom. I know, Linda said quietly, but there are 200 people who have known me my whole life. People who watched me struggle. Who supported me through the divorce. Who told me I deserved happiness. And I want them to understand why I'm not getting married. I want them to know it's not because I failed again. It's because I chose myself. Sarah realized then what her mother was planning. Not a wedding. A testimony. A public claiming of her own worth in the space that was supposed to witness her second chance at love. It was bold. Maybe too bold. But Sarah understood the impulse. Her mother had spent years feeling like she wasn't enough. This was her way of saying she was. The decision to continue with the wedding day, but without the wedding, wasn't about David. He didn't deserve any more of their time or energy or thoughts. This was about Linda taking back her narrative. She'd spent decades letting other people define her worth. Her ex-husband who'd made her feel small. Her family who'd questioned her choices. Society that whispered single mothers were somehow less than. And now David, who'd seen her vulnerability and exploited it. Enough. She would stand in front of everyone who mattered to her and tell the truth. Not a shameful truth. Not an embarrassing admission of being fooled. But a powerful declaration that she'd chosen truth over comfort, dignity over delusion. Sarah watched her mother plan it with an intensity that bordered on frightening. Linda kept the venue, kept the caterers, told everyone the wedding was still happening. David tried calling, texting. He showed up at the hospital where she worked, claiming they needed to talk. She had security escort him out. He sent flowers with notes about second chances and misunderstandings. She threw them away unopened. He contacted mutual friends, spinning his version where he was the victim, where Linda had overreacted, where everything could be explained if she'd just listen. But she was done listening to men who'd perfected the art of making women doubt their own instincts. The morning of what should have been her wedding day, Linda Mitchell woke up with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. Sarah found her in the kitchen, already dressed, makeup done, standing by the window watching the sun rise. "You don't have to do this," Sarah said softly. "Yes I do," her mother replied, "for me. For every woman who's ever been made to feel stupid for believing someone who lied to her. For every person who's ever chosen silence to avoid embarrassment. I have to do this." The venue was decorated exactly as planned. White roses and soft gold lighting. Chairs arranged in perfect rows. Music playing softly through speakers. Guests arrived confused but curious, having been told simply that there would be an important announcement. Sarah stood in the back room with her mother, both of them wearing the dresses they'd chosen months ago when everything had seemed possible. Through the door, they could hear people murmuring, wondering where the groom was, checking their watches. Linda took a breath, squeezed Sarah's hand, and then she walked out. Not down the aisle, but to a microphone at the front of the room where her officiant should have been waiting. The room fell silent. 200 faces turned toward Linda Mitchell, standing alone in her wedding dress under lights that had been arranged to showcase the happiest moment of her life. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady. "I know you're confused. I know this isn't what you expected. There's no groom today. There won't be a wedding. But I wanted you all here because I have something important to say." She could see people shifting uncomfortably. Some looked concerned. Others looked curious. A few seemed to already understand. 6 weeks ago, she continued, "My daughter discovered that the man I was going to marry was not who he claimed to be. His name wasn't entirely real. His past was completely fabricated. His intentions toward me were financial, not romantic. He is a convicted con artist who targeted me because he saw vulnerability and opportunity." She paused, letting that sink in. I could have called this off quietly, could have sent a message, could have let you all assume I'd simply changed my mind. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to stand here, in this dress, in this moment, and tell you the truth. Not because I'm ashamed, but because I refuse to be. Her voice was stronger now. For years, I felt like I had to prove I deserved happiness, like I had to earn the right to be loved. And when David came along, I thought finally someone sees my worth. But he didn't. He saw my weakness. He saw a single mother working too hard, trying too much, hoping too desperately. And he used that. Linda looked directly at the people she'd known her whole life. I was fooled, she said simply, completely, thoroughly, and that's not my shame to carry. That's his. He's the one who weaponized kindness. He's the one who turned love into a con. All I did was believe that I deserved the happiness he was selling. And I'm not going to apologize for that. Sarah watched from the side, tears streaming down her face, as her mother transformed her wedding into something more powerful than any ceremony could have been. But I want you all to understand something else, Linda continued. My daughter saved me. Not because she's suspicious or cynical or unable to trust, but because she paid attention when something felt wrong. She trusted her instincts even when it meant hurting me, even when it meant destroying something I desperately wanted to be real. And that took more courage than I think any of us realize. Sarah's throat tightened. She hadn't expected this. So while there's no wedding today, Linda said, I want to make a different kind of vow. To myself and to Sarah, I vow to trust my instincts. I vow to choose truth over comfortable lies. I vow to teach my daughter that her worth doesn't come from anyone else's recognition of it. And I vow to stand here, in this moment, and say that I am enough, exactly as I am, without a partner to complete me, without someone else's validation to prove it. She looked out at the faces of everyone who'd come expecting a celebration and had gotten something else entirely. Thank you for being here, she said. Thank you for witnessing this. And thank you for understanding that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you were deceived and refuse to let that deception define you. The room was silent for a long moment. Then someone started clapping. Slowly at first, then others joined. Within seconds, the entire venue was applauding. Not because Linda had gotten married, but because she'd chosen herself. Sarah walked forward and stood beside her mother. They held hands, two women who'd survived different kinds of betrayal and come out stronger. As the applause continued, Sarah leaned close and whispered, I'm proud of you, Mom. Linda squeezed her daughter's hand. I'm proud of us. The reception still happened. The food Linda had already paid for was served. The music played. People came up one by one to hug Linda, to tell her she'd done the right thing, to share their own stories of times they'd been deceived or dismissed or made to feel less than. It became less about David and more about community. Less about what had been lost and more about what remained. By the end of the night, Linda was exhausted but lighter somehow. As if standing in front of everyone and claiming her truth had released something she'd been carrying for years. The belief that being loved was more important than loving herself. David tried contacting Linda twice more after that day. Once through a lawyer, claiming she'd defamed him publicly and demanding compensation. Her response, sent through her own attorney, included copies of his court records and a promise to file a restraining order if he didn't stop. He never contacted her again. Sarah learned later that he'd moved to a different state, probably looking for his next target. Probably perfecting his story. Probably betting that most people would choose silence over exposure. The wedding that never happened became local news. Linda gave one interview where she talked about the importance of listening to gut feelings and the power of choosing dignity over delusion. Several women reached out afterward to say they'd been in similar situations. That seeing Linda stand up publicly had given them courage to leave relationships that felt wrong. That her story had saved them from making the same mistake. For Sarah, the experience changed how she understood strength. It wasn't about never being fooled. It was about what you did once you realized the truth. It was about choosing to act even when the action would hurt. It was about trusting yourself enough to disrupt comfort in service of truth. She went back to school that fall with a different perspective. Less naive maybe, but not cynical. More aware but not hardened. She'd learned that protecting someone you love sometimes means destroying the illusion they've built. And that real love, the kind that lasts, isn't built on perfect moments but on choosing each other even when everything falls apart. Linda took 6 months before she started dating again. This time, she moved slower, asked harder questions, trusted her instincts when something felt off. She'd learned that desperation for companionship made you vulnerable to manipulation. That people who loved you wouldn't ask you to ignore red flags. That real partnership enhanced your life rather than requiring you to diminish yourself to fit into it. On what would have been her first anniversary with David, Linda and Sarah went to dinner. Just the two of them. They ordered too much food and laughed too loud and toasted to narrow escapes and second chances that actually deserved the name. You know what I realized? Linda said as they were leaving. What? I spent so long thinking I needed someone to choose me, to validate that I was worth loving. But that day at the wedding, I chose myself. And that felt better than any proposal ever could. Sarah smiled. You should have seen yourself up there. You were magnificent. Linda laughed. I was terrified. But I was also finally free. They walked to the car together, mother and daughter, two women who'd learned the hard way that sometimes the most important relationship you can save is the one you have with yourself. 2 years later, Sarah would be starting college. Linda would be promoted to head nurse. And both of them would look back at that day, the wedding that became something else entirely, as the moment everything changed. Not because David was exposed, but because they chose truth over comfort. Because they chose each other over maintaining appearances. Because they chose dignity over delusion. And in the end, that choice made all the difference. The wedding industry would later cite Linda's story in materials about prenuptial investigations. Support groups for victims of romance fraud would use her speech as an example of public testimony done right. And countless women who heard her story would find courage to ask the hard questions, trust the uncomfortable instincts, and choose themselves even when choosing themselves meant walking away from something they desperately wanted to be real. Because that's what Linda Mitchell taught that day. Love shouldn't require you to ignore warning signs. Partnership shouldn't demand you silence your doubts. And happiness built on lies isn't happiness at all. Think about this story for a moment. Would you have the courage to speak up if you knew it would destroy everything? Would you trust yourself enough to act on suspicions even when everyone around you insisted you were wrong? Would you choose truth over comfort if comfort looked like everything you'd been dreaming of? Linda and Sarah made those choices. They chose the hard truth over the beautiful lie. They chose protection over politeness. They chose each other over maintaining appearances. And while that choice cost them the wedding, the relationship, the dream they'd both wanted to believe in, it gave them something more valuable. Their dignity. Their truth. Their knowledge that when it mattered most, they chose what was right over what was easy. So let me ask you, if you were in Sarah's position, would you have spoken up? Would you have stopped the wedding? Or would you have stayed silent to preserve your mother's happiness? And if you were Linda, would you have had the courage to stand in front of everyone and tell the truth? Or would you have hidden in shame? Let us know in the comments. This is more than just a story about a stopped wedding. It's a story about the courage it takes to trust yourself when everyone else thinks you're overreacting. About the strength it takes to choose truth even when truth destroys everything. About the wisdom of listening to the voices that love you enough to tell you uncomfortable things. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own relationships, your own choices, your own moments of choosing between comfort and truth, click the like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're not crazy for listening to their instincts, that they're not weak for being deceived, that they're strong for choosing themselves. And subscribe to this channel because we tell stories that matter, stories about real people making difficult choices, stories that remind us we're not alone in our struggles, stories that show us what courage really looks like. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And remember, love should never require you to ignore what you know to be true. Your instincts exist to protect you. Trust them.